Welcome to One-on-One with Expert Flyer. I'm your host, Lisa Caslin, and today we are leaving the confines of the planet Earth to get a reality check on space tourism. Our guest today is Laura Forczyk, and she is an aerospace industry analyst with a company called Astralytical. Nice to have you, Laura.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So it just so happens that you are now in the throes of developing a report on space tourism, right?
That's correct. It's an exciting time. Space tourism is coming back in the interest of the public. And so I'm really happy to be working on the research for this report right now that should be out later this year.
Oh, my God, that is so exciting. I can't wait to learn about it. So before we get into some of the work that you're doing, talk a little bit about Astralytical, what your company does, and maybe a little bit about your role specifically in the company.
Sure. Astralytical is a small consulting firm focusing on space, and particularly new space and commercial space. And it has multiple areas. One of which is developing reports, such as the one I was just mentioning on space tourism. And those are internal reports that are sometimes released to the public, and also do consulting for outside companies. So, for example, one of the public things I can talk about was a report we put out last year for a spaceport in Georgia that is being developed right now.
Oh, what a
study for that.
A space what?
Spaceport. Spaceport. So there are different spaceports around the world. Everybody knows of Cape Canaveral Kennedy Space Center, right? So that's the one that comes to mind when you think spaceports. But there are other spaceports around the country and around the world, including these smaller private spaceports that are popping up in almost every state, it seems. I haven't got a tally to see if but yeah, so in southeast Georgia, in an area called Camden County, there is a proposal to put up a private spaceport, and it's really exciting that these spaceports are popping up all over the place.
Okay,
it's not official yet, but that was one thing I did last year was working on some of the research around that spaceport. Another thing I do is I help individuals, so anybody who has an interest in having a space career, whether they are a student or a young graduate or mid-level professionals who have a career who want to switch over to space. So I help them on their journeys. And that's about the kind of things that Astralytical does is various consulting in these areas. And so I founded it 2.5 years ago, and it's been growing ever since. So I'm the owner and founder, and we take on different projects and we keep on growing. And so very excited to get involved in NASA Planetary Science next. That's our next big endeavor.
Wow, that's fantastic. So what kind of company would hire you? Can you give me an example, if not the name of the company, maybe, put it in context in terms of the
Sure. So various companies that usually are doing some kind of breaking research on an area that is not well known. For example, that the county of Camden County, Georgia, is the one who hired me for that report, and that is an area of sort of breaking ground, new spaceports, smaller spaceports is an area, a hot topic that not much is known about it. And so that's one area that I was hired on to go look at. And then various other niche topics where people have an interest in something, such as space tourism, and there's not much depth to the space tourism research. If you can go look, you'll hear a lot of excitement and a lot of promises and
a lot of hype. A lot of hype.
Yeah,
a lot of hype.
I wasn't going to use the word, but a lot of hype. You're right. And so someone like me who really dives deep into it can tell somebody else a lot more about the specifics and about, the challenges and about who might actually succeed and when it comes to space tourism.
Oh, I can't wait for you to update us on this. This is really fascinating. So let's get into it. So talk a little bit about where you're at now. Give us some of the highlights. And we know you don't have any conclusions yet, but this is still fascinating, and I'm sure you've uncovered some interesting stuff that we have no idea about yet.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people are most familiar with big companies like Virgin Galactic.
Yes.
That is, they won the X Prize competition. How long ago was that now? It was over a decade ago. It was gosh, 14 years ago. Am I doing that math right?
Wow, is it?
It was a while ago. I think so. I think it was 2004. And so they actually won an X Prize. It's a competition to fly, not a tourist. So they flew test pilots into suborbital space. Now, the difference between orbital and suborbital orbit, you actually complete complete a space flight around the Earth, whereas suborbital, you don't quite go all the way around. You can go up into space and then come right back down at the same point that you started from, or you can go up into space and come down at a different point, but you don't do a full orbit around the Earth. So that's the difference between suborbital and orbital. Okay. And so what Virgin Galactic has been attempting to do is do suborbital space tourism. And before they can even do the tourism part, they need to prove that their vehicles are safe for people. So they've been flying a lot of test flights with test pilots, and they had an incident a few years ago where unfortunately a test pilot was killed. And so they've been taking it slow to make sure that they have a safe program. They had a successful test flight a couple weeks ago. Yes, I saw that. That was really exciting. Yeah. So that's maybe a company that people have heard of, for example. But the big hype has been, it's going to be any year now. It's going to be, Sir Richard Branson is the one who owns the Virgin Company, and he promises by the end of the year, and he's been seeing that for like several years now, that they're going to start flying tourists. So the big question is, okay, when are they actually going to be ready to fly people? And my best guess is it won't be this year. My best guess is they'll continue to fly test pilots next year. I don't think they're actually going to fly people. This is just my guess now based on my own projections, but I don't think they're going to have space tourists until about 2020. So that's my guess with Virgin Galactic.
But still, that's not too far away.
Yeah, that's not too far away at all. Yeah. And they say they sold over 700 tickets. So that's pretty exciting. Yeah.
For just a suborbital trip.
Just suborbital. So that would be, they take off on a runway with a plane, and they then have a rocket that's attached to that plane. So it's called a carrier plane, and then that rocket is the one that actually takes people to space. So once that plane is in the air, it releases the rocket, which then takes off and carries people into space, and it's about a 5-minute or so ride in space, and then they come right back down.
That's it?
Yeah.
It's 5 minutes.
But that 5 minutes can make all the difference, I mean, like, I've done zero-G parabolic aircraft flights. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's a normal plane that's been slightly modified, takes people on this kind of like a roller coaster. They go up, they climb up, and then they dive down, and they climb up, and they dive down, and they do this repeatedly. In my case, I've done it. One flight had 25 parabolas, another one had 40 parabolas, and so up and down 40 times. And that gives you weightlessness, actual free fall for about 25 seconds.
Wow.
So 25 seconds. And that doesn't sound like a lot, right?
It is a long time, though. Yeah.
It was so much fun. It is. And you can do a lot in those 25 seconds. But if you want to actually experience microgravity, float around, and also be truly in space where you can see the stars and you can see the curvature of the Earth, 5 minutes. That's what you get. And unless you want to do what other people have done, the only space tourists who have ever flown so far have gone to the International Space Station. So there have been, I want to say, I know this number. I'm just blanking on what it is right now, of course. Yeah. But I think there were 7 or 8 actual space tourists that have gone up to the International Space Station through a company called Space Adventures. So some of you might have heard of that company. They were particularly active about a decade ago. And they started flying billionaires or multimillionaires who can afford those kinds of flights because they go up with the Russians, and the cost is very, very high. And they do a lot of training, the same training that astronauts do to prepare for their trip to the space station. And their trip is usually a few days long, maybe a few weeks, or not a few, but a couple weeks long. So it's a short trip, but it's more than 5 minutes, But it's a lot more expensive.
Yeah. So the difference between something like that's a couple of days versus what we anticipate will actually be reality, at least in the initial stages, this 5-minute opportunity, is the reason why these billionaire tourists are having to go through the rigors of such intense training because of the length of the stay?
Yes. So it's both the length of the stay and also what's involved in getting there. If you're just going on a quick suborbital flight, let's say with Virgin, because I haven't talked about the other companies yet, then you're just pretty much strapping yourself into a plane. You have to go through a basic physical to make sure that you're healthy enough, but otherwise, all the other requirements that I know of are voluntary, and there are other ways to go train for this, but I'm pretty sure it's all voluntary. So the only training you really need to do is the training that you decide that you want to do, plus anything that the company may make you do, which would be minimal. And that's it, because you're just strapping yourself in. And for Virgin Galactic, for example, you can get up and float around, but that doesn't have the same rigor as strapping yourself to a Russian rocket, because that's who took the space tourists up to the space station. Strapping yourself into a Russian rocket, so you have to learn another language potentially there.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, so the training that the people have done to go to the space station is very similar to the training that actual astronauts, professional astronauts do, because the rigors are the same kind of level of professionalism needed. So in an emergency situation, for example, they need to know what to do. If something, God forbid, ever went wrong with one of those rockets or with the space station, you can't just have dead weight up there. You need to be able to have somebody who can assist in an emergency situation.
In a team situation, wow, that's interesting. I would presume that these people are hardcore aerospace aficionados in addition to being very wealthy.
If you're going to pay that kind of money, you would definitely need to have that kind of interest, but not necessarily the kind of education. For example, the founder of Cirque du Soleil, and I don't remember his name off the top of my head, he flew on a space tourism trip to the space station. So he does not have a technical background. He's a performer. So when you think about it, anybody who is wealthy enough can buy their way up as long as they are willing to go through whatever they are required to go through to get up there. And I would assume they'd have to have a lot of interest. And there have been other people who've also wanted to take this trip. Some famous musicians, for example, Lance Bass, one of a famous opera singer. These are people who have not gone, but have expressed interest that they want to go. So people who have the money, and I'm guessing a good bit of interest in space, who want to spend that money on their space travel.
Okay, so if we going back to we'll call it the consumer level space travel. I can't wait to hear how much you think that's going to cost. But, presuming all goes well and, in 2020, Virgin Galactic, which I presume will be the first one to really kick this off in a real meaningful way, what do you think this is going to cost, folks? I mean, is it within
Virgin
reach?
Galactic sells, they actually have their ticket prices up publicly, and they have sold over 700 tickets at a ticket price of what is currently $250,000. They initially had it at $200,000, and they raised it. So $250,000 is what gets you a trip on Virgin. But they may not actually be the first. They are in a bit of a race with a few other companies that have expressed interest. The biggest one would be a company called Blue Origin. Their founder is Jeff Bezos, who is currently the richest man in the world. Because he
Amazon.
has Amazon. And so he spends billions of dollars of his own money to build up this rocket company called Blue Origin, and they have some pretty vast goals. And one of their goals is to be able to bring people to the moon. But before they do that, they want to do suborbital tourism. They've already been doing suborbital test flights with payloads, scientific payloads, and they've flown a test dummy called Mannequin Skywalker. And if you look up the video, you can see how smooth the ride is for Mannequin Skywalker. So it's not a space plane like Virgin has. It's a traditional rocket that launches up, and it's actually a very smooth flight, though. You can go look up this video from, I want to say, last year. And that's what they want is people. Yeah, you can put a link to it maybe. They want people to be that Mannequin Skywalker. They don't want to have a mannequin in there. And so the fact that Jeff Bezos has been pouring in a lot of his own money, and he has essentially infinite wealth to be able to afford this, assuming Amazon continues to do well, then the fact of the matter is that he's going to keep on doing this, and as long as it's a safe program and as long as there's no accidents, because you don't want any humans to be harmed. I mean, it's inevitable eventually, but you want to do the best you can to make sure that your tourists are not going to be harmed. He might actually be able to get there around the same time or maybe even a bit before Virgin Galactic does with flying tourists. So it's a different type of flight. It's traditional rocket instead with a capsule on top instead of a space plane with a rocket that launches in the air. So
do we care about that? I mean, how does that?
Right. So a space plane ride will be a bit bumpier, a bit, and there's some technical reasons why you might prefer one over the other. If you just think about from an outsider's perspective, it might not matter. But if you are the one paying that money, you're going to look particularly carefully at the differences between the companies and what they offer.
It's incredible. It really is. So, what do you think the market opportunity is for space tourism? I mean, over the long haul.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, when you think about early aircraft, which is the closest thing that we can give an analogy to, at first it was just the very, very wealthy, right? So at first, and the test pilots, of course, the people who were trying to build their own planes and start their own businesses. They use themselves or test pilots to be able to do these early aircraft flights. Early aviation was very dangerous, and so they were developing it. And then only the very, very wealthy could afford to fly. And, of course, they had cargo, and cargo, especially mail cargo, was, with the U.S. mail, was a huge, big incentive for planes to develop. But at first, if you look back in old images, you see pictures of wealthy people dressed up to their finest clothing, eating great dinners on planes and how it used to be, right? And now most people will casually take a plane ride, right? So the prices have gone down quite a bit. And that's the ultimate goal, is to bring the cost of space flight down to open up the market to most anybody. So for the foreseeable future, unfortunately, it's going to be the very wealthy who can afford it. But I'm hoping within our lifetimes that we can be able to take advantage. I want to buy tickets for my whole family. I've got a few kids. I want to be able to take them with me someday, be able to afford to buy tickets and do minimal training, if any. I've already done the training, but that's my goal, is to open it up for everybody. And so I'm really hoping that one of these days, by being an early adopter, these wealthy people are opening up to everybody else. Now, Blue Origin has not mentioned their ticket prices, so if you are a wealthy person listening to this right now, you could probably contact them directly. But they have not publicly announced what they're selling their tickets for. There's a few other companies that are trying to do the same thing. SpaceX is a big name, and SpaceX is not focused on tourism. However, they have decided that they want to build a giant rocket called the BFR, and their giant rocket will be able to take astronauts to other planets. And they also want to take people from one point of the Earth to another. So remember when I was talking about suborbital and what that definition means? And you can go up into space and come back down the same place you started. Or you can go up and come back down halfway across the world. And it's the same technology, the same rocket, and that's called point-to-point transportation. So instead of taking, a super long flight across the world, you can just take, a half an hour flight across the world. And so
can you imagine? That is exciting.
Yeah, I would sign up for that if I.
In a heartbeat. And of course.
It would be faster than the Concorde, right? So first you have to prove that it's safe, of course, and then you have to set up the infrastructure to be able to have spaceports and also landing sites around the world. But it means Elon Musk is very dedicated to what he does. And he does change his plans along the way. And all of his dates, if you look up what date he says he's going to do this, it's always aspirational. That's the term he uses. It's always, take it with a grain of salt.
Right. It's ambitious.
It's ambitious. But it's very ambitious, So eventually, though, he'll succeed in being able to take people from one end of the Earth to the other. And that's not exactly space tourism, but it is, if you think about it, because that's the same kind of space flight that we're talking about with these other companies.
Yeah, absolutely. He's using space to cut travel time.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
I think
terrific.
there's a large market for that with business travelers especially, and also emergency travel and transporting medical emergencies or, whatever else is very urgent.
That is really, really fantastic. I love that. All right, so before I let you go, do you think So once we start getting accustomed to space tourism, maybe